I'm Trevor, and join me again as I examine the most scary Bigfoot encounters recorded in America, from a veteran forest ranger who finds in a savage battle between Bigfoot and something else, to a hunter tracking Bigfoot that shrugs off rifle fire and drives him to the brink of death. Doug Blanchett was 4 miles deep into a solo patrol on a ridge trail in a stretch of backcountry forest in the Pacific Northwest. Remote enough that the nearest road was 2 hours behind him on foot, quiet enough that he had not seen another person since the trailhead. He has worked in this territory for 11 years. The morning was overcast and cold, the light flat and gray through the canopy, the air holding that deep smell of damp soil and pine resin that the forest gets in late September when the season is starting to turn. He had the handheld camera out because he was documenting erosion damage along the trail edge for a maintenance report. He had been out there 100 times in conditions exactly like this. However, he did not hear the dogman coming. One moment the footage shows the forest was empty. The next, something exploded out of the tree line 15 feet to his left, already moving at full speed, already aimed directly at him, and Doug's body understood what it was seeing about 3 full seconds before his mind caught up. What does a man do when his instincts realize he is about to die before his brain can even process what is chasing him? The footage showed that it was bipedal. It ran on 2 legs, but the mechanics were wrong. The lower legs were too long, the stride too fast, the whole motion, like something familiar, played at the wrong speed. It was close to 7 feet tall and covered in dark brown fur that was slick and matted at the shoulders. And its face was a dog's face. Not a mask, not an approximation. An actual canine snout, long and tapered, with actual canine ears rotating toward him as it ran, reading him. The hands were not paws. They had fingers, long ones, with dark hooked nails that curved like they had been designed specifically for holding something down. The whole creature moved with the absolute, unhurried certainty of a predator that has already decided how this ends. Doug ran. There is no other word for what he did, and no version of events in which a different choice makes more sense. He turned and ran northeast along the trail, hard and fast, and he dropped the handheld camera within the first 2 strides. The footage from those seconds shows the trail lurching sideways, then a spinning view of pine needles and sky, then stillness, a sideways shot of the trail, and nothing else. Doug circled back and grabbed it 8 seconds later. 8 seconds, sprinting back toward the thing that was chasing him, scooping the camera off the ground without breaking stride. But he was running, and behind him, the dogman was gaining. You could hear it in the footage's audio. Not footsteps, something heavier than footsteps, a rhythmic concussive impact as 350 pounds of predator ate up the distance between them in long, wrong-jointed strides. It was not hurrying. That was the worst part. Even at full sprint, Doug could hear that the thing behind him was not at its limit. It was pacing itself, enjoying it maybe, or maybe just so far beyond him in terms of raw capability that hurrying was beside the point. He made 40 yards, maybe 45. Then the dogman hit him from behind. How far can a human actually run when the predator chasing him is not even trying yet? The impact was total and catastrophic. Shoulder height, full weight, full speed, and Doug went down face up with no memory of the transition between running and being on the ground. The body camera took a hard knock and tilted about 20 degrees, and every frame of footage after that moment has a slightly canted angle, sky in the wrong place, trees leaning like the whole world had been subtly rotated off its axis. His arms were pinned under the creature's knees. His legs could move, but the math on kicking a 400-pound predator from flat on his back was not good math. He tried anyway. Then he stopped trying, because stopping was what his body decided, not him. His body ran the numbers faster than his brain and came back with the only answer that made sense, which was that this was over and struggling was just going to make whatever came next worse. What does a man do when every survival instinct suddenly tells him that fighting will only make his death slower? He went still. The forest was quiet above him. He could hear his own pulse and the faint sound of wind in the high canopy, and nothing else. He could see sky through the branches. He could see the dogman's head blocking part of that sky, its dark ears upright, its eyes looking down at him with an expression that was worse than hunger. Something patient and certain and totally without doubt. The dogman did not thrash, did not snarl. It settled its weight onto him with the calm precision of something that had done this before, that knew exactly how much pressure to apply and where to apply it. And the stillness of it was so much worse than frenzy would have been. Frenzy Doug could have understood. Frenzy meant panic, meant mistakes, meant the possibility that something would go wrong for the thing on top of him. This was not frenzy. This was control. How do you escape something that is not making mistakes? The dogman lowered its head, slowly. People always flinch when Doug describes the slowness, because they expect fast. They expect the snap and the darkness and the merciful brevity of something violent. But it wasn't fast. The head came down in a long, deliberate arc, and the jaws opened, and the snout was longer up close than distance had suggested, and the teeth were very white and very large, and Doug could feel the warmth radiating off the inside of the mouth before it even touched him, like standing too close to something that was burning. Then the jaws closed around his skull. The upper jaw pressed across his forehead, and the lower jaw settled under his chin, and he could feel the points of every tooth finding their place against his skin with a horrible, intimate delicacy. The warmth surrounded his entire head. Every muscle in his body let go at once. He lay there in the dark inside those jaws, and he waited. And the waiting was its own kind of horror, a suspended moment that seemed to stretch and stretch without ever arriving at the end of itself, and he thought with terrible clarity, "This is it. How long can a moment last when you are waiting for something to crush your skull?" Then in the camera, you could hear something hit the ground hard enough that Doug felt it through his spine. It came up through the earth and into his back like a shockwave. Not a sound first, but a physical event, a deep concussive pulse that traveled through solid rock and soil and arrived in his chest like a fist. Then the sound followed, a massive low boom, and then another, slow and rhythmic and absolute. Something enormous was beating a tree against the earth somewhere to the northwest, and whatever it was not small, and it was getting closer, and the dogman above him had gone completely, suddenly, terribly still. The dogman held its position. Doug could feel it inhale, one long, controlled pull of air through the nose, tasting what was coming. And somewhere above him, its ears shifted, rotating toward the sound, the way a radar dish rotates toward a signal. The whole creature seemed to recalibrate, the weight on Doug's arms changing slightly as it straightened, attention moving away from him and toward something else entirely. What kind of presence can make a predator forget the prey already trapped beneath it? Then the jaws opened, and Doug could breathe again. He lay on the ground and stared up at the canopy while the dogman stood over him, and the forest beyond the tree line kept shaking with those slow, massive impacts, and he turned his head. At the edge of the camera's frame, Bigfoot was seen stepping through a gap between two old-growth firs at the edge of the clearing, and Doug's first thought, the thought that hit him before any rational response could form, was that his sense of scale was simply broken, that what he was seeing could not occupy the space it appeared to occupy, that the world did not make things this large, that walked upright and breathed and had eyes that moved. If the creature that just tried to kill you is afraid of something else, how big must that something be? 9.5 feet? Maybe more. The shoulders were wider than Doug's full arm span, the arms themselves hanging with the knuckles at mid-thigh, even fully upright, and the fur was almost black, dense and heavy-looking, matted in thick ridges across the back and shoulders like armor that had grown there over decades. Every step it took landed with a weight that the ground registered, not shaking the earth, not theatrically, but registering, a subtle compression, a slight give, because the weight behind each footfall was simply that significant. Each exhale came out as vapor in the cold air. It smelled of deep forest and something older and stranger, something that had no category in any system of classification Doug had ever learned. It moved without urgency, without hesitation, without any suggestion that the distance between itself and whatever it had come here for was anything other than already settled. It was the most terrifying thing Doug had ever seen, and it was not even looking at him. It was not looking at Doug. He was lying directly between it and the dogman, and Bigfoot looked straight through him, not around him, through him, the way someone looks through a chair that happens to be in the way. Its eyes were set deep under a heavy shelf of brow, dark and calm and absolutely fixed on the dogman, and whatever was happening behind those eyes, Doug was not part of it. And in the footage, the dogman howled. It was the first sound it had made, and it split the air like something breaking, a shriek with a growl underneath it, two frequencies layered in the same throat, building over 2 seconds to a pitch that made the air feel wrong and then cutting off like a switch had been thrown. It was a challenge. There was no other word for the sound, no other possible interpretation. The dogman was claiming the space, declaring itself, daring the thing at the tree line to take another step. If the dogman is challenging it instead of running, just how dangerous must the thing at the tree line actually be? Bigfoot's answer was to pick up a rock. The camera showed it moved to the edge of the clearing where a boulder had fractured and left a loose chunk of pale gray granite, grabbed the piece one-handed, 80 or 90 pounds of rock, one-handed, and threw it in a flat spinning arc like a discus. The rock crossed the clearing so fast that the camera barely tracked it. It caught the dogman across the ribs with a crack that echoed off every ridge wall in earshot and sent it skidding sideways across 6 feet of trail before it stopped against the base of a pine tree. Then the dogman got up. The way it got up was the first thing that told Doug tonight was not going to end cleanly. In the footage, you could see it rose with a controlled shake, favoring the right side where the rock had hit, and its ears were forward, and its eyes were bright, and the sound that came out of it now was lower and steadier, not a challenge anymore, but something older and more patient, a deep continuous growl that Doug felt in his back teeth. Bigfoot moved. The dogman launched itself straight at Sasquatch, ducked under the arm that swung for it, and opened Bigfoot's forearm with a full raking swipe on the way past. If something that fast can get inside the reach of arms that large, how long before one of those attacks lands somewhere fatal? Dark blood ran down the arm. Bigfoot looked at the wound. Not in pain. The expression, if it could be called that, was not pain. It was something closer to confirmation, like an answer to a question that had already been asked. The fight moved into the trees, and Doug followed. He knew how it looked. He knew the rational thing was to run in the other direction and not stop until he hit pavement. But he had a camera still rolling, and he had just watched things that no one in the history of documented human experience had ever filmed, and the part of him that was a ranger, or maybe just the part of him that was deeply, stubbornly human, could not let it go. He followed. He kept as much distance as the terrain allowed. The terrain did not allow much. How close can a human safely get to a fight between creatures that large before he becomes part of it? The forest on that stretch of ridge is old and dense and broken, ravines cutting down toward the drainage, deadfall stacked in chest-high tangles, sight lines that open up for 20 feet and then close again. The dogman used all of it. It was never where Bigfoot expected it to be, circling through the shadows, feinting from one direction and coming from another, using its speed to stay just out of range of those enormous arms. It moved like it was made of decisions rather than muscle, every step a calculation, every retreat an invitation, drawing Bigfoot's weight and momentum in one direction, and then being somewhere else entirely by the time they arrived. Bigfoot's approach was different and brutal. It moved through the forest the way a flood moves through a canyon. It did not dodge the terrain, it removed it. Doug watched Bigfoot uproot a Douglas fir. How strong does something have to be to turn a living tree into a weapon? A mature tree 10 inches across at the base, standing 30 feet tall. Bigfoot took hold of the trunk about 4 feet up, dug its heels into the earth, and pulled in one single continuous motion. The root system tore free with a sound like the forest itself, tearing, a long, ripping groan of earth and rock and shredded root, and the whole tree came up, trailing clods of dark soil, and Bigfoot swung it. The root end was the heavy end. It connected with the dogman's flank and sent it cartwheeling into the far wall of a ravine with an impact that rattled Doug's camera from 40 feet away. Bark and rock and chunks of earth rained down for 3 full seconds afterward. Then the dogman climbed out of the ravine. How many times can something take punishment like that and still keep coming? It came up the wall fast and wrong, dropping to all fours for those few seconds in a way it hadn't moved before. And seeing it that way, lower, faster, more animal, was somehow worse than seeing it upright had been. It hit the rim and went straight over the top and onto Bigfoot's back in one unbroken motion, claws finding the fur and the flesh beneath, working toward the neck. The footage showed Bigfoot reaching back and couldn't get purchase. So it chose a different approach. It found the nearest large tree and walked backward into it at full speed. The impact was enormous. Birds left the canopy in every direction. Bark exploded off the trunk in chunks the size of dinner plates. Doug said he felt the concussion in his sternum from 40 feet back. The dogman dropped, hit the ground wrong, one leg folding under it, and still got up. The footage showed the terrain kept narrowing, the ridge on one side and the ravine on the other, and Doug was being pushed closer to both of them whether he wanted to be or not. At one point, he was 30 feet from Bigfoot. He could smell it, a deep animal musk, wet fur and exertion, and something older underneath, something that had no name in any category of experience he had. And it did not look at him once. He was no longer the target. He had never been more grateful for that in his life. The fight found its rhythm. The footage showed Bigfoot throwing rocks and trees, the dogman reading the windups and sliding around them, each exchange leaving damage on both sides. The dogman feinted and feinted until it found an opening, then came inside Bigfoot's reach and raked 4 claws across Sasquatch's face, forehead to chin, straight through, and the blood that followed was immediate and dark and ran into Bigfoot's eyes like paint. What happens when something that powerful is suddenly blinded by its own blood? In the audio of the footage, the sound that came out of Bigfoot then was not a roar. Or it was a roar, but calling it that the way you would call thunder a sound was technically accurate and completely insufficient. It was low and sustained, and it came from a chest cavity the size of a storage trunk, and it filled the forest the way a physical pressure fills a space, pressing outward against every surface, every tree, every stone, and for 3 full seconds after it ended, the forest was completely, absolutely silent. No wind, no birds, and no creek. Just that resonance fading through the trees and the blood on Bigfoot's face and the dogman still circling in the sudden absence of all other sound, and Doug standing 30 feet away, not breathing, not moving, feeling in some animal part of his brain that the sound he had just heard was a boundary marker, a declaration that this place, this moment, this outcome had already been decided, and everything still happening was just the world catching up. Both of them were damaged, but both of them were still moving. And somewhere above them, the sound of falling water kept growing louder as the ridge rose toward whatever was waiting at the top. The forest broke open without warning, and the sound hit him before the sight did. A deep, constant roar that rose up through the trees and swallowed everything else as the ridge crested. What happens when 2 monsters run out of forest and reach open ground? The footage showed that one step, Doug was in trees, and the next, he was standing on open rock, a wide stone shelf jutting out from the ridge into open air, 40 feet above a churning pool fed by a waterfall that came down hard through a notch in the rock above. The falls were loud enough that all other sound was simply gone, swallowed completely, replaced by that single, overwhelming roar. Mist hung over everything in a permanent white cloud. The rock underfoot was the dark red-brown of old iron and covered in a thin, treacherous skin of moisture that made every step feel like a negotiation with gravity. Doug moved carefully toward a boulder outcrop about 20 feet back from the edge and pressed himself against it. The stone was cold and slick against his back. Somewhere in the mist ahead of him, 2 things that should not exist were about to finish what they had started. The dogman was running out of body. If a predator built for speed is starting to fail physically, what kind of desperate decision comes next? It was obvious now. The way it held its right side, the shallow care in its breathing, the slight drag in the leg that had been crushed between Bigfoot's back and the tree. The speed was still there in bursts, but it cost something each time, and the intervals between those bursts were getting longer. It had backed itself toward the edge of the falls, putting 40 feet of empty air at its back, and it stood there in the spray and the gray light with its ears up and its eyes burning, and it looked not beaten. Something harder than beaten. Something that had made a choice and was done reconsidering it. Doug filmed it from behind the boulder and understood, with a clarity that felt almost like grief, that it was not going to stop. That there was no version of this where it stopped. Whatever the dogman was, it was not built for stopping, and it would go over that edge still fighting, still biting, still refusing, because that was the only mode it had. It charged. When a wounded predator makes one final charge, is it trying to win or simply trying to take something with it? No wind-up and no hesitation. In the footage, you just see an explosion of movement off the whetstone. 3 strides, low and fast, and Bigfoot could only partly step aside. The dogman hit at shoulder height, and the impact twisted them both, a gash opening across Sasquatch's shoulder that ran deep, and for one awful moment, they were both moving toward the edge. Then Bigfoot's hand found the dogman's scruff, the dense fur at the back of the neck, and held. They grappled in the mist at the edge of the waterfall. The camera footage from those 30 seconds is mostly white, shapes moving through spray, the sound of impact and falls, and something that could be growling or could be the water, impossible to separate. Doug said that he was not breathing. He was braced against the boulder with the camera shaking in his grip, and he was watching 2 things, the size of small trucks, tear pieces out of each other at the edge of a 40-foot drop, and his body had apparently decided that breathing was a lower priority than not making any sound or sudden movement that might remind either of them he existed. The dogman bit through 2 of Bigfoot's fingers. If a creature that strong can lose pieces of its own hand, how much worse can this fight still become? Doug saw it happen and recorded it, and still could not fully believe it. It got the ring and middle fingers of the left hand and twisted, and the last joint of each came away, and Bigfoot pulled back hard, but the damage was done. Blood running off the edge of the shelf in thin red lines, falling 40 feet through the mist and into the churning water below. The dogman scrambled backward on the wet granite, trying to reload for another charge, claws scratching uselessly at the slick surface. Nothing caught, nothing held. Bigfoot reached out with its right hand, the undamaged one. The fingers closed around the dogman's throat, and the sheer size of that hand, each finger longer than Doug's forearm, made the dogman look, for just that moment, almost small. Bigfoot drove straight down. The footage showed dogman hit the rock shelf, and the impact traveled through the stone and into Doug's boots 20 feet away and up through his legs, and he felt it in his back teeth. The dogman clawed. It raked both hands down Bigfoot's arm, over and over, opening the skin in long parallel lines, blood pouring freely, running in bright threads toward the edge and over it, and none of it changed anything. The wet rock gave it nothing. No leverage, no purchase, and no way out. When the ground itself offers no escape, how long can even the most relentless predator keep fighting? One rear leg went over the edge, then the other, and Bigfoot walked it the rest of the way. A deliberate, unhurried march across the whetstone with the dogman dangling by its throat, claws still working, still fighting, still refusing, right up until the moment there was no more rock, and there was nothing under it but 40 feet of cold air. Then Bigfoot dropped the dogman. Doug recorded it fall in the waterfall, the whole 2 seconds of it. The sound it made hitting the water cut through the roar of the falls the way a gunshot cuts through a crowd, flat and final. And then the current had it. The white water took it northeast into the drainage, and in under 10 seconds, there was nothing. No body, no surfacing, and no disturbance on the water that indicated something that large had ever entered it. Just the falls, and the mist, and the creek bending away through the dark trees below. Doug pointed the camera at that water for a long time. He watched the surface and the foam and the place where the creek curved out of sight. Nothing came up, nothing came back. Bigfoot stood at the edge of the shelf for a moment, mist soaking its black fur, blood running from both arms and dripping off the ruined left hand into the spray. standing above the water where the dogman had gone down, and then it turned and walked back into the forest. It did not look at the water. It did not look at the trees. It did not look at Doug. If something that powerful walks away without even acknowledging the human witness, what does that say about how little the human mattered in this encounter? It just walked, the same heavy, deliberate stride it had carried out of the tree line, and after 4 steps, the forest took it, and it was gone. The footage ends there. Whatever Doug Blanchett knows now that he did not know before he walked that trail, the camera at least confirms this much. It happened. The footage is real. The blood on the rock shelf was real. The shape of Bigfoot moving back into the dark between the trees was real. My name is Marcus Webb, and I run a 240-acre cattle ranch in the Cascade Foothills outside Packwood, Washington, about 15 miles from the nearest town. I've been on this land for over 2 decades, and I had never seen Bigfoot until the night of October 14th. But this was no ordinary night. The ranch had been quiet all through October. The herd was healthy, with no predator pressure since late summer when a bear had tested the eastern fence line twice and moved on. That was the last time anything from the forest came onto the property with real intent. On the night of October 15th, around 9:45 p.m., I heard the cattle start making noise. Somehow, this was not the low, restless sound they make when a coyote is working the perimeter. It was sustained, panicked bellowing, the kind that comes from active pursuit or active contact, as if something were chasing them. So I grabbed my flashlight and gun and headed toward the pasture to check. The sound got worse as I got closer. The bellowing was layered with multiple animals, and beneath it I could hear something else. Heavy footfalls in the pasture soil, much heavier than anything deer or elk make. I reached the fence line and put the flashlight across the field. Up ahead, I saw a huge animal. It was Bigfoot. Bigfoot was 150 yards out, deep in the pasture, with a calf's hind legs in both hands, pulling it across the ground toward the eastern tree line. The flashlight beam caught it full on, and for a second, I just stood at that fence and processed what I was looking at. The calf was alive, legs kicking, full panic, trying to find its footing. Bigfoot was moving it steadily and continuously, as if the 400-pound weight were not a variable at all. He didn't move fast or slow. Seeing I needed to save my calf, I shouted. Instantly, Bigfoot stopped, and his head turned toward the flashlight beam. And then he held there, looking at me, still holding the calf's legs, while I stood at the fence with a rifle I hadn't raised yet. Those eyes caught his flashlight. I saw a greenish eyeshine, steady and direct, the way eyeshine looks when an animal is fully focused on what it's looking at, rather than tracking movement. After a few seconds, Bigfoot turned back to the tree line and kept dragging the calf. This time, though, I raised my gun. At first, I fired a warning shot into the air, and just so you know, a .308 is not a quiet rifle. The shot cracked across the pasture and echoed off both tree lines, and everything in the field went still for a beat, including Bigfoot. This caused Bigfoot to release the calf, but now he was standing to full height. I want to put a number to what full height looked like from 150 yards with a flashlight. Still, the honest answer is that the numbers I came up with in that moment, 8 feet, 8.5, feel inadequate now that I've had years to think about what I was actually seeing relative to the fence posts behind it. The top of my fence posts sits at 5 feet. Bigfoot's shoulders were well above them by a margin. Whatever the measurement was, it did not belong in a Pacific Northwest cattle pasture. Then Bigfoot screamed, a deep roar that started low and built and then sustained for about 4 seconds. I felt it even from 150 yards, not the sound itself, but the pressure behind it, the low frequency that bypasses your ears and registers somewhere in the body instead. The cattle that were still upright pressed against the far fence. A group of them that had been milling along the south side went still and stayed still. Then Bigfoot reached back down, picked up the calf's legs, and walked the remaining distance to the tree line, where it disappeared into the forest. Apparently, my warning shot had accomplished nothing except confirming that I was there. I stood at the fence for a moment after Bigfoot went into the trees. The cattle were still bunched against the far fence. The The pasture was quiet, and there was a drag mark in the soil from where the calf had been pulled. I stood at the fence and looked at it. This was a problem. I called my neighbor, Tom Harrison, and told him that someone was stealing my cattle and that I needed another set of eyes and another rifle. Tom had worked on ranches his whole life, and he didn't ask many questions. He showed up at 10:15 p.m. with his 2 adult sons, all 3 armed, and we moved toward the tree line with flashlights. We found the calf about 200 yards into the forest. It was dead, its neck broken cleanly. The kill was efficient, the kind of efficiency that comes from something that knows exactly where to apply pressure and in what direction. It turns out that Bigfoot had carried the 400-pound animal 200 yards into a dark forest, killed it, and left it there. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know it's not the behavior of an animal hunting for food in any straightforward sense. Just then, we heard the coops. When we arrived, the chicken coop was not the way I had left it that evening. The door had been pulled completely off and thrown several feet to the left of the entrance. There was a shadow inside. It was Bigfoot. What it was doing there was systematic, not a frenzy, not the scattered chaos a predator in a confined space usually produces. Bigfoot was moving through the coop, picking up laying hens with both hands, breaking their necks with a single quick twist, and dropping the bodies. He moved from one hen to the other, and there were 60 hens in that coop. It had been in there for less than 5 minutes by our estimate, and had already worked through a significant portion of them. At least 10 were dead, some without their heads. I raised my gun and fired at center mass from approximately 80 yards. The shot hit, and I know it did because of what happened next, and because of the blood we found there afterward. I was aiming for Bigfoot's upper chest, which was the largest available target. The impact registered on his body. A visible flinch, a half step back. But what followed was the response of an angry beast. Bigfoot turned to us. He roared, not the sustained territorial sound from the pasture. This was shorter, sharper, and was directed outward. Bigfoot was coming for us. I had to take down some things about this night just so this video doesn't get taken down by YouTube, but there are some hidden details about my encounter with Bigfoot that are very, very disturbing. But don't worry, I attached all of it in a file down below. Check the description at your own risk. Anyway, as soon as I saw Bigfoot racing towards us, I ran. Even though there were 80 yards between me and the barn, Bigfoot covered. Half of it in the time it took me to cover mine. Luckily, Tom and his son split off toward their truck. I made it to the barn door and shut it behind me with the rifle up and my back against the wood. Bigfoot smashed the door just seconds after I closed it. But something worse happened. Bigfoot grabbed the door frame from the outside and pulled, took hold of the structural frame the door was set into, and applied force outward, away from the barn wall. I heard the support beams inside the wall give way, one after another, with a sequence of sharp cracks as the connection between the door frame and the barn's front wall failed. The frame came away from the wall, and part of the front section folded inward. A large gap suddenly opened to the night where the solid wall had been 2 seconds earlier. Bigfoot didn't enter through the gap, though. Instead, he moved along the exterior, grabbing boards and pulling them outward. Each pull took a section of the front wall siding with it. Some boards splintered, some came away in longer pieces, and some took framing nails with them as they went. It was pulling the barn apart from the outside, moving laterally across the front face, board by board. Bigfoot was destroying everything. I went out the back door and ran for the house. Behind me, the demolition continued. 2 roof sections came down while I was running. I could hear the crash of interior beams hitting the floor, the sound of corrugated roof panels coming off their supports. By the time I reached the house and looked back through the window, the front third of the barn structure was open, and Bigfoot was still working along the remaining wall section, still pulling. At 11:03 p.m., Bigfoot left the barn and moved back to the cattle pasture. There were 3 young steers in the near section of the pasture, each between 600 and 800 pounds. I watched from the house window. Bigfoot was on a crazy rampage. The first steer didn't make it 10 yards before Bigfoot caught it by the neck and put it down with the same efficiency it had used on the calf. The movement took maybe 2 seconds from contact to the animal being on the ground. I have watched livestock die from predator attacks, even from bears and tigers, but none of them looked like that. The speed was one thing, the precision was another, and there was a lot of blood. The second steer had a better angle and got more distance across the field before Bigfoot closed the gap. Even with how fast it was, this wasn't a chase that lasted more than a few seconds. Soon, Bigfoot had the animal's hind legs, pulled it down, and stomped on the skull. The steer did not move after that. The third steer made it the farthest. I watched it reach the far side of the pasture, the full 300 yards of open ground, before Bigfoot caught it. But what happened next really caught me off guard. Bigfoot grabbed the animal around the torso, a 730-pound steer, and lifted it completely off the ground. PD carried it approximately 30 feet of open pasture while the animal was still struggling, hooves off the ground. Then Bigfoot threw it into the fence line. The fence posts on that section were treated 6x6 timber. 6 of them snapped. The last steer died on impact. Even with the rifle in my hand, I couldn't do anything. I just provoked Bigfoot, and I had to bear the consequences. Just then, Bigfoot moved to the equipment shed. My shed housed 2 tractors, my ATV, and a full set of farm implements, along with tool storage. The rolling door on the front is an industrial gauge mounted on a heavy-duty overhead track. Even with the weight, I had just one question in mind. Could Bigfoot break in? Bigfoot grabbed the bottom of the door and hanked it upward off its track in one motion. The track produced a sound that carried clearly across the property, even from the house. Then, Bigfoot went inside. What I heard over the next several minutes, the crash of the ATV overturning on the concrete floor. The progressive sound of metal shelving units pulling down and hitting the floor in sequence, one after another, spaced by about 4 seconds each as it worked its way along the wall. Individual tools scattering, the high metallic ring of wrenches and sockets hitting concrete, and 2 separate heavy impacts I couldn't immediately identify. I identified them the next morning. Both were from the tractor's front loader assembly, struck hard enough to crack the metal housing in 2 places. A front loader assembly on that model weighs approximately 800 pounds and is not a component that cracks from incidental contact. The shed went quiet for about 30 seconds. Then Bigfoot came back out. It was carrying one of my 55-gallon diesel drums. Full, that drum weighs close to 400 pounds. It was carrying it overhead in both hands, moving with it across the open ground toward the smaller barn. And the way it moved with that weight was the same deliberate, unhurried pace it had used all night, not straining and not adjusting its gait to compensate for the load. Moving with 400 pounds overhead, the way you'd carry something you weren't bothering to think about. It threw the drum, 20 feet of open ground between where it was standing and the barn's near wall, and the drum went through the siding and into the interior space beyond it. The diesel soaked into the barn floor and ran down through the boards. By some specific luck I still think about, nothing ignited. If it had, that night would have ended differently in ways I don't want to calculate. At 11:26 p.m., Bigfoot went back to the chicken coops. There are 3 coops on my property. The largest was the one it had already hit. The second and third were smaller wooden structures on the south side of the barn complex, 20 hens each. Solid construction, but not designed to stop what was out there. It went through all 3. The methodology on the second and third was faster than the first. No digger ripping this time, just the wall. Bigfoot put both hands on the near wall of each structure and pushed inward, collapsing the frame in a single motion, then worked through the interior. Some birds got out into the dark, most didn't. In less than 10 minutes, it killed everything it could catch across all 3 coops. The count the next morning was 51 chickens dead. Some of those I had raised from chicks. Tom and his sons had repositioned the truck toward the driveway by then, headlights on, filming on their phones. Bigfoot saw the headlights. It charged the truck from about 100 yards. Tom told me later that the speedometer was at 35 miles per hour before they hit the paved road. Bigfoot ran approximately 50 yards in pursuit before stopping, and by Tom's account from the rearview mirror, it was not the truck getting far enough away. What stopped it was a decision. It pulled up at a specific point, planted, and stood there while the truck continued accelerating away. It stood in my driveway and roared for nearly 6 seconds. I heard it from inside the house with the windows shut. The sound was different from the ones earlier in the night, longer, louder, with a quality I can only call declarative. Not a threat aimed at something specific, not the sharp, directed roar it had produced when I shot it. Something broader than that. The sound moved across the whole property and into the surrounding forest, and I could hear it settling into the dark after it ended, the way a sound that large takes a moment to leave a space fully. Then it stood there, chest working, blood visible on the right shoulder from where the rifle shot had hit, surrounded by 90 minutes of work. The barn is partially open, the coops flat, 3 steers dead in the pasture, my ATV overturned in the equipment shed. a diesel drum through the wall of the smaller barn, and Bigfoot standing in the middle of my driveway in the dark, not moving, not looking at any of it. Then Bigfoot turned back toward the pasture. I thought it was leaving. I was wrong. It walked back through the field slowly, not at the pace it had used during the kills, but something slower and more deliberate, the way you walk through a space when you're looking at it rather than moving through it. It stopped near the first steer it had killed and stood there for close to 30 seconds, not feeding, not doing anything I had a category for, just standing over the dead animal in the dark, the way you stand over something when you're making a decision about it. Then it moved to the fence line where the third steer had gone through. It stopped at the gap, looked at the broken posts, and grabbed one of the remaining upright posts with both hands. It didn't pull it down, it just held it for a moment, and then it let go and kept walking toward the eastern edge of the pasture. I was watching all of this from the house window with the rifle in my hands and no clear idea of what I was watching. The rampage had a shape to it when it was happening: livestock, barn, shed, coops, truck. But this was different. Bigfoot moving slowly through the pasture in the dark, stopping at things, not destroying them, not eating anything. It looked like something taking stock. At the eastern tree line, it stopped again, and for the second time that night, it turned back and looked at the ranch. This time the pause was longer than the first, not 10 seconds, closer to 20 or 25. I stood at the window, and I did not move, and I did not lower the rifle, and I watched Bigfoot stand at the edge of my property and look back at everything it had done. There was a specific quality to those 20 seconds that I haven't been able to put clean language around in the years since. It wasn't the stillness of an animal that had stopped to rest or to listen. It was the stillness of something that was present in a different way than it had been during the previous 90 minutes, the whole night. It had been in motion, and in motion with a purpose, but standing at that tree line in the dark, looking back at the ranch, it was something else, something that registered what it was looking at. Then it stepped into the trees and was gone. Tom and his son stayed until sunrise. We didn't go into the tree line that night. There are decisions you make in those hours before dawn that you don't explain to people who haven't been in them. Practical decisions based on what you've just watched for 90 minutes. None of us said much. Tom's older son sat in the truck with the engine running and the headlights pointed at the tree line the whole time. Not because it would have helped, but because doing something felt better than doing nothing. Tom himself walked the driveway perimeter twice with a flashlight, checking the ground, not saying what he was looking for. His younger son stayed close to the house with me. We listened to the forest for sounds that never came, whatever had been in. Those trees all night had gone quiet, and the quiet was worse than the noise had been, because at least when there was noise, you knew where it was. At first light, I walked the property. The main barn's front wall was gone from the left corner to approximately 2/3 of the way across. The frame was exposed, and 2 roof sections had collapsed into the interior, taking a workbench and most of the tool storage on the near wall down with them. The smaller barn had a 2-foot breach from the diesel drum, with fuel still seeping into the floorboards when I got there. The smell of it carried across the whole yard. The 3 dead steers were where they had fallen. The first 2 were close together in the near section of the pasture. The third was at the fence line. The posts around it splintered and splayed outward from the impact. I stood next to that steer for a while. It was a 730-pound animal, and it had been carried 30 feet off the ground before it was thrown. I have been a rancher for over 20 years, and I could not have told you before that night that anything was capable of that. The footprints in the soft ground near the eastern fence were the clearest physical record of everything. I measured several of them before the morning dew softened the edges. 18 inches long, 5-toed, full heel impression. The stride spacing ran close to 60 inches. I photographed everyone I could find, and I documented the drag mark from the calf, which was still visible running from the center of the pasture to the tree line, a wide compressed channel in the grass that the overnight damp hadn't closed over yet. I stood at the tree line for a long time, not going in, just standing at the edge of it, looking at where the drag mark ended and the forest started, thinking about the 200 yards of dark between that point and where we had found the calf the night before. The blood by the chicken coop had pooled on the ground near where Bigfoot was standing when I fired. Dark red, almost brown, which I noted at the time. I collected it with what I had on hand and sent it to a small independent lab that a wildlife contact had recommended. The results took 6 weeks. The DNA analysis came back as a primate, not bear, not any known predator species, not human. The sample showed primate markers that didn't correspond to any catalog species in the databases the lab used. The technician who processed it called me directly after the results came in and asked where the sample had come from. I told him about a predator attack on my property. He asked what species. I told him I didn't know. He told me the sample was going into a separate file and that if I had more material, I should send it. I never followed up on that call. I've thought about why, and the honest answer is that I wasn't sure what following up would produce that I was ready to deal with. The 25 seconds at the tree line after Bigfoot had walked back through the pasture, after it had stood over the dead steer, after it had held that fence post and let it go. That second look was longer than the first, and it happened after everything was already finished. There was no functional reason for it. The night was over, and my ranch had been torn apart. I was in the house, and Tom was in the driveway, and neither of us was a threat anymore. And Bigfoot stood at the edge of that tree line for 25 seconds and looked back anyway. I don't know what that means. I know it happened, and I know that something capable of carrying a 730-pound steer and throwing it through a fence is also capable of standing at a tree line for 25 seconds and looking back at a ranch in the dark for reasons I cannot explain using anything I know about animal behavior. In total, Bigfoot killed 51 chickens, 3 steers, and 1 calf. It caused $85,000 in structural damage and left a set of DNA results sitting in a file at an independent lab. Whatever walked out of my tree line that night, it came back. Not that night, not for several months, but it came back. And that's a different story. A few weeks before the attack on my farm, I read a news report that Big had attacked one Dale Mercerfoot. However, the Bigfoot that attacked me was not the same. That raises 3 strange questions. How many Bigfoots are in America? How many Bigfoots are on Earth? And most importantly, is Bigfoot the only mythical creature in existence? The footage starts with Jessie Curson, just her face, too close to the lens, jaw tight, voice already at full volume. She's somewhere on a forest trail in the Pacific Northwest, fir trees pressing in on both sides, and she is furious. The guide is visible at the edge of the frame, hands up, patient in that way that means he's been patient for a very long time. She doesn't care. She said that she paid for a premium wildlife excursion. She keeps saying premium, and she claims she hasn't seen a single thing worth her money. The guide tells Jessie to stay on the marked trail. She laughs. That laugh is the last normal sound in this entire recording. What happens in the next 60 seconds will make your stomach drop, because Bigfoot is already standing in those trees behind her, and she has absolutely no idea. 80 yards back, maybe less. A shape moves between 2 trees, upright, massive, unhurried, black against the darker black of the timber. It doesn't run and it doesn't hide. It simply crosses from one trunk to the next with the casual confidence of something that has never once needed to be afraid of anything in these woods. The footage catches maybe 2 full seconds of Bigfoot before it's gone, swallowed by the cedar shadow. Jessie spins the phone around trying to see it. The rest of the group is already 20 yards ahead. She stays behind on purpose, phone up, grinning, absolutely certain she just found the hidden attraction they were selling all along. She pushes off the trail to get closer, and what she finds tucked under those branches is going to change everything, because Bigfoot didn't come to this part of the forest alone. Jessie pushes through the salal brush like it owes her something. There, half collapsed under a tangle of broken branches beside a moss-eaten fallen log, is something she was absolutely not prepared to find. A baby Bigfoot. It's small, maybe 4 feet tall, covered in dark coarse hair, matted flat in places like it's been wet and dried wrong. Its limbs are thin in the way young things are thin, built more for future size than present use. It's breathing fast and shallow, ribs visible with each inhale, and one of its back legs is pulled at an angle that doesn't match the other one. The injury is obvious. Whatever happened to it, a fall down the slope, a trap edge, something worse. It happened recently. She starts whispering loudly to her camera that she found an actual baby Bigfoot. She says it twice. Then she swings the camera back to her own face for a reaction shot, eyes wide, mouth open, already performing the moment instead of living inside the danger of it. The baby Bigfoot pulls itself backward against the log, breath quickening, dark eyes fixed on her with the specific terror of a creature that is hurt, cornered, and completely alone. She doesn't register any of that. She crouches down, cooing, and starts talking to it like it's a stray she found behind a grocery store. What I keep coming back to is the baby Bigfoot's eyes in this frame, because they're not looking at her. They're looking past her, into the trees behind her, at something she can't see yet. The baby Bigfoot bares its teeth the moment she gets within arm's reach. Not a slow warning. Immediate, full, every small tooth visible, a sound coming from its throat that sits somewhere between a hiss and a bark. Its whole body compresses backward, shoulders up, injured leg dragging, putting every inch of distance between itself and her hand that the fallen log will allow. Any reasonable person reads that as a hard stop. She reads it as adorable. She tells the camera it's just scared. She says it in the voice people use with puppies. She says scared means it's real, and real means she wins, and winning means she needs to get her hand on it before the guide comes crashing through the brush and ruins everything. She's already talking about how no one can deny footage if there's physical contact. She reaches forward and touches its shoulder. The baby Bigfoot screams, not a whimper, not a cry. A scream, sharp and violent and carrying the kind of sound that has no business, coming from something that size. She yanks her hand back hard, startled, and then, and I have to be precise here because this matters for everything that follows, she slaps it, open palm, fast, directly across its face, the kind of thing people do when they're frightened and haven't thought past their own adrenaline. She laughs immediately after, nervous, high-pitched, and keeps talking to it like the slap didn't happen. Every bird within 100 yards leaves the trees at once. She doesn't notice. She's reaching for its arm now, trying to get a grip for the camera, repositioning her angle. And that's when she finally looks up and sees the tree trunks surrounding her. The bark on every one of them gouged open in long vertical strips, raw wood exposed, pale and fresh. The lowest marks are 8 feet off the ground. The highest disappear into the canopy. Whatever made those was here very recently. Whatever made those is very, very large. Those marks on the trees aren't a warning, they're an address. And the thing that lives there just heard its baby scream. What charges out of that timber next will make every hair on your body stand up. There is no roar. That's the thing nobody expects. The mother Bigfoot gives her nothing. One moment the tree line is still. The next moment something the size of a refrigerator is moving at full sprint through it, and the sound isn't a roar. It's the sound of timber giving way, branches snapping like gunshots in sequence, getting louder, getting closer, a percussive countdown that ends at her. The footage becomes chaos. The camera catches fragments, a blur of black fur, the sky tilting hard left, bark rushing past the lens, her own hand white-knuckled and shaking at the bottom of the frame. Jessie screams at a pitch I've only heard in this recording. The mother Bigfoot is enormous in the half frames where she's visible, broad-shouldered and fast in the way large things aren't supposed to be fast, covering ground with a momentum that makes the forest floor shake through the camera's audio track. Jessie grabs the baby Bigfoot. I don't think it's a decision. I think her arms close around it the same way arms close around anything nearby when a body goes fully into panic. She runs, and here is the only reason she survives the next 30 seconds. The mother Bigfoot stops because the baby Bigfoot is screaming against her chest, clawing at her jacket with both hands, and the mother Bigfoot will not close the remaining distance while her injured infant is that close to the impact zone. The baby Bigfoot is shredding the front of her jacket now, shrieking, drawing blood through the fabric with each pull. She is screaming back at the mother Bigfoot over her shoulder, actual words, actual sentences, telling Bigfoot to back off, to stay away, threatening to call the park. The mother Bigfoot vocalizes once, long, low, resonant, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. Something in the trees ahead of her vocalizes back. I remember the first time I heard that exchange in the audio, that call and response, and I had to sit down because I knew exactly what it meant, and it meant she was already surrounded. Jessie's moving downhill now, completely off trail, crashing through undergrowth with no sense of direction and no plan beyond forward. The baby Bigfoot is still locked against her chest, still clawing, and the camera is somehow still running, catching the ground. Her feet, the blur of fern and root and loose soil and strobing flashes. She doesn't know where she is. The guide's voice is gone. The group is gone. There is only the forest and the sound of something massive moving through it just beyond the visible tree line to her left. The mother Bigfoot doesn't close the gap. She maintains it, parallel, deliberate, never fully visible, just the rhythmic crack of branches marking her position the way a metronome marks time. Every time the woman slows, rocks start hitting nearby trunks. Not thrown wildly, placed, single impacts, always just ahead or just to the right, redirecting her downhill, keeping her moving in a specific direction. She wasn't being chased, she was being steered. She gets a signal bar on her phone for approximately 4 seconds. She calls 911, gets a single ring, and drops back to nothing. She screams at the phone like screaming will generate reception. In the footage, the baby Bigfoot takes the opportunity to rake its fingers across her forearm, and she yelps and squeezes it tighter, which makes it scream louder, which makes the mother Bigfoot's parallel movement accelerate for 3 full seconds before settling back into that steady, patient pace. Then, from somewhere uphill and to the right, far enough to be a different animal entirely, a vocalization rises and holds. Jessie freezes. A second call answers from behind her. Lower register, slower, like a door closing. Then a third, directly ahead. Jessie starts hysterically crying. Full, ugly, terrified crying, the camera pressed against the baby Bigfoot's squirming body, her voice dropping from outrage into something much smaller and much more honest. She tells the camera this was supposed to be content. She says she just wanted content. She says this wasn't supposed to be real. She breaks into a clearing maybe 40 yards across, ringed by deadfall on 3 sides, and her legs just stop working properly. She staggers, catches herself on a rotting stump, and stands there heaving, the baby Bigfoot still writhing against her chest, her jacket shredded across the front, thin lines of blood visible on her forearm where the clawing broke skin. The tree line on the far side of the clearing shifts. The mother Bigfoot steps partially into the open for the first time since the charge. Not fully, 1 shoulder, 1 arm, half a face, but enough to see the scale of her properly, the breadth of her shoulders, the way she stands with a stillness that isn't calm, but is something that has long since finished deciding. She is staring directly at Jessie. Jessie panics. Not a decision, but a detonation. She throws the baby Bigfoot down, a hard release downward onto the moss and soil, and the baby Bigfoot hits the ground and immediately starts dragging itself toward the mother Bigfoot with both arms, injured leg pulling behind it, making a sound that I can only describe as desperate. For half a second, the clearing goes completely silent. The mother Bigfoot's eyes move from Jessie to the baby Bigfoot crawling toward her. Jessie starts backing away in small steps, hands up, already narrating her own survival to the camera, saying it's over, saying she's released it, saying they're even now. But why did she have to throw the baby to the ground? The mother Bigfoot looks back up at her. That's when the branch directly above the woman's head explodes downward. What drops out of that tree canopy directly in front of her is bigger than the mother, bigger than anything the footage has shown so far. And it lands close enough that the ground shakes the camera. This is where it stops being a wildlife encounter and becomes something prehistoric. The next Bigfoot doesn't swing down. He doesn't climb. He drops, full weight, both feet, from somewhere in the canopy directly between her and the only open exit from the clearing. The impact registers in the camera's audio as a concussive thud that clips the microphone, a sound like something structural giving way, and the phone physically shakes in her grip from the ground vibration alone. Bark and dead branches shower down around him. He straightens up slowly, unhurried, the way something straightens up when it has never once in its life needed to hurry. He is enormous in a way that recontextualizes everything else the footage has shown. The mother Bigfoot, who stopped my breath the first time I saw her step into that clearing, looks measured and proportionate, standing next to this male. He is broader, taller, the kind of size that stops reading as biology and starts reading as geography. His chest is heaving with slow, deep pulls of air. He doesn't vocalize. He doesn't posture. He simply stands between her and the path and stares at her with an expression I have spent months trying to find the right word for and keep landing on the same one. Deliberate. Jessie screams so hard the audio distorts into static for 2 full seconds. Then she does the thing that has made this footage infamous in every research circle I move in. She points the camera directly at his face. She is screaming profanity, a relentless, unbroken stream of it, and between the curses, she is threatening him. Threats that would be unhinged, directed at a person, and are cosmically absurd, directed at a male Bigfoot standing 8 feet tall in an old-growth clearing. He takes 1 step toward her, a single step, unhurried, simply closing distance. She runs. The camera swings violently left, and the footage becomes a tunnel of blurred timber, her breathing so loud it drowns the forest, branches whipping the lens in rapid-fire succession. Behind her, no footsteps, no crashing pursuit, just silence, which is somehow the most terrifying sound the recording has produced yet. Because silence means he doesn't need to run. The footage in this stretch is almost unwatchable, not because of what it shows, but because of what it almost shows. She's sprinting blind, fully blind, no trail, no landmark, No light except what filters through the canopy in broken gray sheets, and the camera is catching the world in violent lurching fragments. She doesn't see what hits her. The phone leaves her hand mid-stride and the footage goes sideways instantly. The camera has landed in brush maybe 6 feet from where she was standing, and it stays there, running, recording a static sideways frame of undergrowth while everything else happens just outside the shot. The audio is what I need you to actually listen to. Screaming first, Jesse's, immediate and raw, the kind that comes from impact rather than fear. Then heavy crashing, not frantic but methodical, branches breaking in sequence. Then a vocalization so low it barely registers as sound, more as a pressure change, a frequency that seems to come from inside the chest rather than outside the ears. Then her voice again, words dissolving into pure sound, and then impacts, dull, rhythmic, each one followed by a shorter cry that gets progressively weaker over approximately 40 seconds. Then silence, complete and total, that even the insects stop for a moment. Her voice returns, much farther away, maybe 100 yards, screaming a name I can't make out, screaming for help, screaming in the unfocused way people scream when they no longer know what direction help could possibly come from. Then one final scream, cut off at its peak like a wire snapping under tension. The phone records 8 hours and 40 minutes of empty forest floor after that before the battery dies. But it doesn't end there. Rangers running a routine check on cameras placed near an illegal hunting corridor 3 days after her disappearance pulled footage that made the lead officer sit down in the middle of the trail and not stand back up for several minutes. The trail cam catches Jessie. She is alive, that's the first thing. She is upright and moving, which given the audio I just described, feels like information that should be more relieving than it is. She is moving because she is being made to move. One adult Bigfoot ahead of her, one directly behind, both of them taller than the camera's upper frame can fully capture. Her gait is wrong, lurching, each step a separate decision rather than a continuous motion. The walk of someone whose body has already begun tallying damage it hasn't fully reported yet. Her head is down, her arms are pulled slightly back, her hands are bound behind her. Not with rope, with stripped green branches twisted together in overlapping loops. She is screaming the entire time. The trail cam has no audio, but her mouth is open in every frame, body shaking with the effort of it. The baby Bigfoot trails behind the female, unharmed, moving slowly on its injured leg, watching her. The female Bigfoot shoves her forward twice in the captured frames. The second trail cam sits 400 yards upslope from the first, anchored to a ponderosa pine at the edge of a natural bench in the terrain, a wide flat shelf of rock and compressed soil that sits above the drainage creek like a stage. Whoever placed this camera was tracking elk migration patterns. What it recorded instead was that Jessie is tied to a tree. Both arms are pulled wide around a thick pine trunk, wrists secured on the far side with the same stripped branch construction from the first camera, her body pressed flat against the bark, facing outward into the clearing. Jessie's face is swollen on the left side in the specific way faces swell from blunt impact, tight, shiny, eye reduced to a slit. The male Bigfoot circles her. The female Bigfoot stays at the tree line with the baby Bigfoot, watching, not participating, not intervening. The baby Bigfoot is pressed against her side, dark eyes tracking the woman against the trunk. She is still shouting, still fighting, still trying to wrench her wrists free, still issuing demands into Sasquatches that has no interest in her terms. The male Bigfoot completes 11 full rotations in the captured footage before he stops. And when he stops directly in front of her. And what his hands do next is what law enforcement has never allowed to be publicly described until now. The male Bigfoot stops his rotation directly in front of her. He stands there for a full minute without moving, which on wildlife camera footage feels extraordinarily long, and she fills every second of it with words, curses, threats, pleading that she reframes as demands the moment she hears herself doing it. The whole exhausting machinery of a person who has never learned that some situations cannot be talked out of. He reaches forward and takes her right wrist in one hand. He pulls it against the exposed broken wood on the trunk. It is not surgical. It is not clean. It is full crushing force applied with the casual certainty of something that has never needed to calibrate its own strength against anything fragile, and the result is immediate and catastrophic, and her entire body convulses against the restraints in a single violent arc. She broke her hands. She screams curses directly into his face. He doesn't react. He moves to the left wrist. She is crying now. Real crying, the performance completely gone, and she is pleading in a register I have never heard from her in any prior frame. Small and specific, and bargaining with things she clearly values. her phone, her platform, her following, as if any of that has purchase here in this clearing at this elevation with this audience. The blood loss is immediate and severe enough to be visible on the bark within seconds. When Jessie tries to collapse forward and her legs fold from shock, the male Bigfoot stops her fall with one hand flat against her sternum, holding her upright. He then looks down at her feet, lifts one of her feet, and brings his full body weight down through a single deliberate stomp. Then he does the same with her other foot. After those two stomps, Jessie can no longer stand on her own. Her head drops forward, but the trail cam catches her eyes still open in later frames, still moving, still present in the way eyes are present when a mind refuses to leave, even as the body negotiates its surrender. And that's not even the worst part. The male Bigfoot begins striking the pine trunk. Not her. The trunk itself, the tree she is bound to, starting at a point roughly 5 feet off the ground, where the bark is thinnest, and the wood beneath shows the pale compression stress of a root system working against a sloped grade. Both fists, alternating, driving into the same strike zone with a rhythm that starts slow and builds, each impact sending visible vibration up through the trunk and into her body where she hangs against it. She is no longer screaming. She is making a sound that is quieter and worse, a low, sustained vocalization that I don't have a clean word for, except to say it is the sound of a person beyond the reach of their own defenses. He adds shoulder impacts between the fist strikes, full body weight rotated into the wood, the kind of force that moves things, that changes the structural conversation between a tree and its own roots. This continues for several minutes, not frantically, not in rage, but with the focused repetition of something that understands the mechanics of what it's doing and is simply executing them. The root system on the downslope side begins to lose the argument. The trunk develops a lean so subtle, the first frames barely show it, just a degree or two of deviation from vertical, that in a healthy tree on flat ground would mean nothing. This tree is not on flat ground, and it is no longer a healthy tree. The lean accelerates. She feels it before the camera shows it clearly. Her head comes up, eyes open fully for the first time in multiple frames, and for one terrible second, she is completely present and completely aware of exactly what is about to happen to her. The trail cam catches the exact frame of the trunk snapping at the strike zone and the whole structure dropping sideways, root ball tearing from the slope in a slow curtain of soil and rock, and she goes with it because she was never getting free of those branch restraints, and the male Bigfoot made sure of that before he ever threw the first strike. The female Bigfoot doesn't move from the tree line. The baby Bigfoot watches. There is a camera near an old survey path that the State Forestry Service installed 7 years ago and checks approximately twice a year. It sits at the junction of 2 drainage lines where the terrain funnels downhill toward a basalt ledge system above the river, a natural corridor that elk use in wet season and that human foot traffic avoids because the slope is unstable and the ledge offers no safe vantage. Just a straight drop of roughly 40 feet into spring current running fast and cold and indifferent. The forestry technician who pulled this footage during a routine check has not returned to field work since. I reached him through a mutual contact and he answered exactly one question before he hung up. The one question he answered was whether what he saw was real. He said yes, and then he was gone. The male and female Bigfoot are dragging the fallen trunk downslope together. Jessie is still attached to it, still alive. The camera catches movement from her, small and irregular, the involuntary kind that means a body is continuing its basic functions without meaningful direction from the person inside it. Her head leaves a thin, intermittent trail in the pine duff as the trunk moves, and I will not describe that further, except to say that search teams who walked this route 11 days later documented and photographed what remained along a quarter mile of forest floor and submitted it as physical evidence in a case that was subsequently sealed at the federal level. The route is deliberate. That is the thing I cannot explain away and have stopped trying to. This is not random downhill momentum. The trunk is being steered, redirected at 2 separate points where the natural grade would have taken it left toward a gentler slope, and instead it is pushed right, kept on the corridor, kept moving toward the ledge with a consistency of purpose that I have replayed against topographical maps until I could recite the terrain from memory. They know where the ledge is. They have always known where the ledge is. The female Bigfoot works the uphill side, the male takes the weight on the lower edge, and between them, the trunk moves with a grinding slowness that feels ancient in a way I don't have the vocabulary for. Not primitive, not savage, something older than both of those words, something that was here before this forest had a name and will be here long after every trail cam battery has died. The baby Bigfoot follows at a distance, picking its way carefully on its injured leg, patient in the specific way young things are patient when they are learning by watching. She makes one sound in this footage that the forestry technician described to me before he hung up. He said it wasn't screaming anymore. He said it was smaller than that. The final trail cam is the worst one. And I mean that in the most literal and absolute sense of that word. The final camera catches everything. The male and female Bigfoot maneuver the trunk to the ledge edge with the quiet coordination of something practiced, something purposeful. One shove, together. The tree and her body clear the ledge, and the camera catches 40 feet of open air and then the river swallowing both without ceremony. The two Bigfoots stand at the edge for several seconds, looking down. Then they turn and walk back into the timber. The baby Bigfoot follows, disappearing last. Jesse Kerson's body was found 11 miles downstream, 14 days later, massively bloated. The bear was already too close when I heard it. Not the crashing sound people imagine. No snapping branches, no warning. Just the sudden wrongness of something large occupying space that had been empty a breath before. 500 pounds, maybe 6, moving through a second-growth spruce with a quietness that shouldn't have been possible for that size. I had the .338 up before my mind caught up to what my hands were doing. 8 years in this corridor. You don't think about the rifle, your hands just know. I want to back up because the morning doesn't start there. The morning starts in the dark before first light, when I crossed into the lower corridor and the temperature dropped the way it does when you move from open hillside into old timber. Not a weather change, a different world. I've made that crossing dozens of times. I know how to walk it without sound, heel to toe, weight transfer smooth. By the time I'm in the corridor in the dark, I'm not thinking anymore. I'm listening. I was hunting alone. That matters to everything that follows. Not because hunting alone in grizzly country is reckless, I've done it my entire adult life, but because alone means the record of the morning is entirely mine. No one else standing 30 meters away with a different angle. The record is what I experienced, and I've had to spend a lot of time since September deciding how much confidence to place in the recording instrument, which is me. I know this corridor. That's the honest beginning. I know where the creek bends south around the granite outcropping and where the game trail intersects the bench drainage. I know the sound the water makes when it goes over the flat rock at the ford, lower in September than August, a different note. And I know the old growth on the south side runs about 200 meters before the density drops enough that visibility opens to 40, 50 meters in good light. 8 years is long enough to know a piece of country the way you know a house you grew up in. The kind of knowing that isn't conscious, that lives in the body and expresses itself as rightness or wrongness before thought arrives to explain it. The first indication that the morning was different came at 6:58, though I didn't know the time. I don't carry a watch in the field. The sound came from my northeast, maybe 60 meters, and it wasn't something I had a category for. Low, percussive. Not the sound of a tree falling, which I know well. That has a progression to it, a creak, and then a rush, and then the strike, and not a rockfall, which in this terrain would come from above and to the south anyway. This was a single contact, something brought down against earth. Deliberate, the way a thing announces itself. I stopped. Went still the way you go still when the information is incomplete and you need to buy time for more. Whatever it was, didn't repeat. The drainage went back to its own quiet, and I stood there for a full minute, maybe more, trying to place it in a category that made sense for this country. Bear knocking over a standing dead? Possible. Possible, but not quite right. I've heard that, and there's usually secondary sound, the roll of wood on ground, the scattering. This was clean, one impact and silence. I filed it and kept moving because the light was coming, and the elk don't hold position past legal light when the pressure's on. I moved northeast along the main game trail. The corridor was doing its morning thing, the gradual emergence of detail as gray became color, the shapes separating from the dark. I was thinking about elk, about the approach angle from the south side and whether the wind would hold. I was not thinking about what had made the sound at 6:58. The bear was at 30 meters when I first registered it, maybe 35. Moving through the second growth spruce on a line that would intersect mine in about the time it takes to draw a breath. The quietness of it was what stopped me first. That wrongness, that sense of displacement, the feeling of scale where scale shouldn't be. Then I processed what I was seeing, and the rifle came up. Bear 4, though I didn't have a name for it then. Just a mature male, close enough that I could see the silver tipping on its shoulders and the mass of the head and the way it moved with a low-slung power that elk don't have and deer don't have, a different kind of weight, the weight of something that has no serious predator in this ecosystem and knows it at a cellular level. Its nose was working constantly, that side-to-side movement, reading the air, compiling information I couldn't access. It was angled slightly away from me, which meant it hadn't fully fixed on my position yet. The wind was southeast to northwest. I was upwind. In about 3 more seconds, it was going to know exactly where I was. It didn't charge. That was the first wrong thing. A grizzly that close, surprised, usually commits. The decision happens fast, and there's a shape to it. The lowered head, the ears, the bladed stance that shifts weight forward. I've had 2 encounters at distance that went to the charge, one when I was guiding a client and put myself between him and a sow with cubs, and both times the bear's body language telegraphed the decision before the charge began. This bear did none of that. It stopped. It looked at me, not the wild swinging look of a surprised animal, but something more deliberate, a fixed assessment. The way an animal looks at something when it's running a calculation rather than reacting to stimulus. And then it made a sound I had never heard a bear make before. Low, pulsing, not the teeth-popping bluster of an agitated bear, not the woofing exhalation of a threat display. Uncertain, thick with something I don't have a word for except to say it sounded like the noise a very large and very confident animal makes when it encounters something that unsettles its confidence. Then it turned, not away from me, away from the trees to my northeast. I was so focused on tracking the bear's retreat that I almost missed what it was retreating from. The bear moved northwest at a pace that wasn't quite panic, but wasn't the unhurried amble of a bear going about its business. Directional, the way an animal moves when an assessment has produced a clear instruction. It registered as scale first. I don't know how else to say it. The eye catches proportion before the brain has vocabulary for proportion. In the tree line to my northeast, where the morning light hadn't fully penetrated the timber, there was a shape that was wrong. Not wrong the way a shape is wrong when it's ambiguous, when you can't tell if it's a stump or a standing deer or a boulder you hadn't accounted for. Wrong the way a shape is wrong when you can see it clearly and what you see doesn't fit. Upright, still, wide at the shoulder in a way that had no referent in my experience of this drainage or this terrain type, or I realized slowly, and with a sensation I'm still not able to name accurately, any terrain I'd ever hunted in the previous 8 years. It was watching the bear leave. I know what I was looking at. I know the word for it, Bigfoot. Then it turned and looked at me. What I experienced in that moment was not terror, not the animal terror of the bear encounter, which is physical and fast and operates below language. This was something else, something that had more room in it. The way it looked at me did not feel like being registered by an animal. It felt like being considered. The difference between a thing looking toward you because you're a stimulus and a thing looking at you because it is deciding something. I started moving west before I decided to. My legs made the call. What I remember from the first 100 meters is almost nothing, a kind of white noise where rational thought used to be, my body running a program my mind hadn't written. I know I was moving fast. I know the rifle was in my right hand and the muzzle was down, which is wrong in the mechanical sense and right in every other sense, because I was covering ground, and a shouldered rifle costs ground. When I came back to something like conscious awareness, I was already past the second camera post and heading for the main game trail that runs west toward the ford. And I knew I was moving fast because the country was sliding past faster than it usually does when I'm in it, familiar landmarks arriving before I expected them. I made myself look back. Once, it was following, not running, not rushing. The stride was long and even, each step covering ground that would have taken me 2 steps, maybe 3, and the pace had the quality of something that doesn't experience terrain as a problem to solve, as if the ground beneath it was simply cooperating. The head was level, not bobbing the way a running animal's head bobs. And the arms, and this is where my mind snagged and kept snagging for the rest of the run, the arms were close to the body, hands still. Not swinging the way arms swing when you're moving fast, just there. The whole figure was composed in a way that had nothing urgent about it, despite the fact that it was closing ground. It was not interested in the bear. I understood that with a clarity that arrived fully formed, bypassing the usual process of construction. The bear had moved through this drainage ahead of whatever this was, registering scent, flushing cover, and once it had located me, once the finding was complete, it had been allowed to leave. Because the finding was what it had been useful for, and the finding was done. Now the bear was gone. I was the only thing left in this corridor, and it was still coming. I ran the ford without slowing, 8 inches of moving water. Cold enough in late September that I should have felt it, and I didn't feel it. Just the impact of the far bank's gravel against my boot, the scramble up the mud at the edge, the tree line closing around me on the west side. My lungs were burning by then. I'd been moving hard for close to 20 minutes through elevation, and the debt was accumulating in my legs and lungs in ways I was aware of and couldn't do anything about. Respiratory debt in the mountains has a shape to it. There's a point where the available pace starts declining, and there's nothing to be done except accept the new ceiling. And I could feel that ceiling approaching. The figure behind me was not experiencing a ceiling. It had no ceiling I could detect. The stride I'd seen in that single backward glance covered ground faster than I was covering it. Not the explosive gap-closing rush of a bear in a bluff charge, but steadily faster, a pace that didn't seem to require anything from the body producing it. The choke point was the only play I had left. I knew this terrain. I knew the choke point from 3 seasons of hunting the corridor, a place where the valley narrows between the rock face and the creek, where the drainage floor compresses to 30 meters before opening again below the high bench. There was a natural defensive position at the east side of the gap, a rock face that would put stone at my back, and from that position you could see the full narrow section of the drainage for 50, 60 meters, which in .338 terms is close range, not far enough to feel comfortable, but close enough that the round does everything it was designed to do. I changed direction, angled north toward the choke point, adding time to my route, but adding what I needed more than time. Stone at my back, a clear sight line. The crossing took me through blowdown from 2 winters back, old spruce creating a grid I had to climb over and under. I lost 30 seconds to it. I don't know what happened to the gap during those 30 seconds because I didn't look back. I reached the choke point at the rock face and put my back against the stone and turned. The drainage corridor was empty, 40 meters of narrow valley floor, creek on the left, rock face on my right, the timber at the far end where the spruce closed in and the sight line ended. Nothing moving. The sound of the creek over its stones, normal, unchanged. My own breathing, which was not normal and not unchanged. I was pulling air in the way you pull it after a hard mountain run, the chest expanding fully, the exhalation too short, the whole system running in deficit. I gave it 30 seconds and made myself slow the breath down because a controlled respiratory rate is a controlled trigger pull, and I was going to need the trigger pull to be controlled. I knew this terrain. Narrow gap, rock face on the east side, clear sight line back down the drainage. High ground in the relative sense. I was elevated maybe 3 meters above the drainage floor, which changes the geometry of a shot in ways that matter. The .338 was loaded. I'd been carrying 5 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber through the whole morning, the standard field carry. 4,000 foot-pounds at the muzzle, a round designed for exactly the category of animal I might encounter here. Not designed for this, there is no caliber designed for this, but it was what I had, and I was using what I had. It came into view between 2 old spruce at the corridor's far end. I had spent the 20-minute run trying to rationalize what I'd seen in the tree line. Trick of light, bad angle, stress distorting scale. A bear standing on its hind legs looks wrong in the way upright bears always look wrong, and in partial light of a shadowed tree line, that explanation isn't ridiculous. It requires some contortion of the evidence, but it doesn't require you to accept something that reorganizes everything. Open ground in full morning light does not allow for those exits. What I saw was upright and bipedal and moving at the pace I had tracked during the run, that steady, patient, ground-eating pace that covered 9 feet per full stride. The head was level. The shoulders did not rotate the way shoulders rotate when a human walks fast. The arms hung in a way that had no human referent. Wrist height at mid-thigh, not swinging, close to the body. still in a way that the arms of a moving thing should not be still. And the proportions. The height I couldn't calculate exactly from that distance and that position, but I knew was wrong. Not wrong the way a tall man is wrong. Wrong the way a category error is wrong. Too high from the drainage floor, too wide across the shoulders, the wrong shape in the wrong place, at a size that didn't connect to any animal I'd encountered in 8 years or 34 years of being alive in the outdoors. It was not running, it was walking toward me. What I was looking at had a name I had spent 20 minutes refusing to use. Bigfoot. I fired. The .338 is loud enough in a canyon that the first shot takes everything for a moment. Sound, vision, coherent thought, all of it replaced by the report bouncing off the rock face and the creek canyon until it's hard to locate yourself in the noise. When it came back, I was already chambering the second round, the bolt handled without conscious instruction. I found the target in the scope and fired again. Then I shifted my weight from right foot to left, a practiced adjustment for changing angle, and fired a third time. Nothing. That is the word for what happened, and it is not a sufficient word. No reaction, no stumbling, no change in gait, no flinching. The rounds went somewhere. I heard 2 strike earth behind and to the right, but the third I am certain was on target. I was aiming for center mass. The angle was up, which I registered distantly as information I didn't want. The middle of it was above my eye level from the rock face base, which required an upward angle to reach. 3 rounds, no observable effect. I kept firing because the act preserves the possibility the next round will matter. Every hunter who has ever raised a weapon at a dangerous animal knows this at a level that doesn't require articulation. You fire until something changes. The stopping, if it happens, is something that happens to you because the evidence against the possibility of the next round mattering becomes too large to continue past. 3 rounds. I stopped. There was a specific moment when I understood the 4th round was not going to change what the first 3 hadn't changed. That understanding arrived not as a conclusion I reasoned toward, but as something given, delivered whole. I stopped, and then I set the rifle down against the rock face. Not dropped it, set it, the butt finding stone, the barrel leaning, deliberate as setting down a tool you've decided isn't the right tool for the job. It was a choice made under conditions where no choice should have been possible, and yet it was chosen, consciously, clearly. Then I turned to the rock scramble above me, and I climbed, both hands on granite, feet finding purchase in cracks and ledges I'd never scouted because I'd never conceived of needing them. The rock face above the choke point wasn't technical climbing in the formal sense, no rope required, no specialized equipment, but it was the kind of terrain where misjudging a foothold costs you everything, where you have to commit weight to a hold before you're sure it'll take the weight. I committed every hold. I didn't think about whether the holds would take me. I climbed because the alternative was standing at the base of the rock face with an empty rifle and whatever understanding I'd reached about the empty rifle's significance. The rifle stayed where I left it. I didn't look back. I have tried to explain this to people who ask about it, and the best I can offer is this. Looking back was not going to change what I'd find, and what I'd find was going to cost me what I couldn't afford to spend. The math of the climb required everything, full attention, full commitment of every limb and pound of body weight to the problem of the next hold. Dividing that attention was the same as failing the climb, and I had already made the decision somewhere in the sequence of those 3 rounds and the silence that followed them, that the climb was the only thing that mattered. I needed my hands. That's what I said later, and that's what I meant, and it contains everything it contains. The bench opened above the choke point, and I crossed it at a run, arms driving, legs past the point of pain, into something that doesn't have a name. 200 meters of open ground, bench grass at knee height in September, the far tree line a dark line at the edge of my vision. I crossed it the only way you can cross open ground, with a gap closing behind you, at maximum effort. I made the far tree line and went in without slowing. Deeper, northeast, into terrain that steepened and got technical fast. The granite formation started, broken country where roots have to be found rather than followed. I found the ledge by accident, northeast face of a formation not on any hunting access map, no reason for anyone to go there. A narrow ledge at a height that required technical scrambling to reach, with an overhang above that would cut the wind and the sightline from below. I climbed up and sat down against the rock wall and did not move. The temperature dropped the way it drops in the mountains in late September, fast once the sun angle changes. I had a day hunt's worth of gear, not gear for a night at elevation. I managed. I did not build a fire. I sat against the rock and listened to the drainage below and heard nothing that told me where it was or how far or whether it was still in the country at all. I stayed on the ledge through the night and into the following afternoon when the search team found me. The search team lead, a woman with 16 years running searches in grizzly country, looked at me the way medical professionals look at a patient whose chart has surprised them. She said I looked like I'd had a significant experience. She was not wrong. My statement that evening was incomplete, not dishonestly. I said what I could say, which was that I'd had a bear encounter at close range and made poor navigation decisions and ended up on the ledge. There is a way a mind protects itself in the immediate aftermath of something it hasn't finished processing by staying inside the available categories a little longer, deferring the revision until it becomes unavoidable. The revision became unavoidable over the following weeks as the details that had been blurred by stress sharpened into something I couldn't soften back down. The shape in the tree line, the pace, the stride, the 3 rounds and the silence after, the angle of the third shot. The following June I went back to the drainage. No rifle, 3 days in the corridor with a notebook and an absence of agenda, not something I'm naturally suited to, having spent 8 years in this country organized around finding a specific animal. Going back without that structure felt like going back to a house I'd lived in and finding the furniture rearranged. The shapes were familiar and the orientation was wrong. On the second morning, I found fresh tracks on the main game trail. That morning's prints, dew still in the grass at the trail margins, impressions clean and sharp, the kind of clarity you get from tracks made in the last few hours. Moving through the corridor in the same direction. I didn't need any analysis to recognize the length, the stride, the proportions my body had already cataloged on September 24th. I didn't follow them. I stood at the trail margin and looked at them for what must have been 2 minutes. Then I stepped back and walked 20 meters to a downed spruce and sat on the trunk at the trail's edge and waited. An hour, maybe a little more. The drainage did its late June morning things, light shifting through the canopy, the creek louder than September, birds working their routines. A doe at the seep crossing, 200 meters away. A juvenile hawk, working the open bench before drifting out of sight. Normal things. The things a drainage does when it's doing its own business. I saw nothing that explained the tracks. Eventually, I got up from the log and walked out. People ask me if I think something was watching during that hour. They ask it carefully, the way people ask things when they're not sure the question is allowed. I understand the carefulness. I practiced it myself for 8 months. I built careful language around the edges of what I knew because the careful language preserved the possibility of remaining inside the available categories. The categories where ordinary conversation happens and you can talk to people without watching them recalibrate their assessment of your reliability. I don't think it in the way you think about things that might be true. I know it the way I knew on September 24th what the situation required before my mind had completed the sentence. That kind of knowing lives somewhere below language and doesn't come up for debate because it isn't a thought. It's closer to a physical fact, like knowing where the ground is beneath your feet. You know it because you're in contact with it, and the contact is direct, and no amount of subsequent reasoning changes what the contact told you. I am still here. That is the foundational fact of everything that follows. I ran well. I shot well. I climbed well. None of those things are why I'm here. I'm here because of a decision made by something else about what the morning was going to produce at a point in the sequence when I had no remaining input into the outcome. 3 rounds from a .338 Winchester Magnum at close range in open terrain. Then I set the rifle down. Then I climbed, and it let me climb. The whole morning had a shape. The sound before dawn was the beginning of it. The bear encounter was the middle. The chase, the choke point, the 3 rounds were the body. The letting was part of the shape, not luck, not distraction. It happened because the morning arrived at a point where a decision was available and the decision was made. The bear was never the point. I understood that in the drainage, running, and I've understood it more completely in the months since. The bear moved through the corridor and found me the way a bear finds things, by covering ground, reading air. And once the finding was done, it was allowed to leave. And then the thing that had been using the bear's ranging for its own purposes moved openly through the corridor it had cleared. That sequence implies planning at a level I don't have a comfortable framework for. The difference between processing a situation and having already decided about the situation before it began. The bear left, and then, when the space was clear, what had been waiting for the space to be clear moved into it. not because the bear's leaving was coincidental, because the bear's leaving was the signal. I've told the story in the third person to investigators and the search team. Cole Rutherford was found on the ledge. Cole Rutherford gave a statement. Cole Rutherford returned to the drainage the following June. The distance helps because what happened to Cole Rutherford on September 24th is something I am still in the process of becoming a person who experienced it, and the process is slow. What I think, and this is the most speculative thing I'll say, is that the hour on the log was permitted, that sitting there was something it knew about and chose not to interrupt, the way it chose on September 24th not to close the gap at the choke point. The not closing is a choice. The not interrupting is a choice. Choices imply a chooser with access to alternatives. I don't think I deserve to be let go, not as self-punishment, as a descriptive observation about the economy of the situation. I was in its corridor. I had a rifle. I fired the rifle. None of those merit grace, and yet the grace was extended, and I am here to account for it, and I find myself unable to settle the account because the debt keeps compounding the longer I look at it. It was there before I arrived. It will be there after I'm gone. The drainage has been keeping its own record for longer than anyone has been running cameras in it, longer than I have been hunting it. What I saw on September 24th has been in that country for a long time. Longer than the question of what it is has been a question anyone was asking. And on one morning in September, it made a decision about me, and I am still not sure what I did to deserve it. But I know what I know. I know what the rifle did and didn't do. I know what 3 rounds from a cartridge designed for large, dangerous game told me when they told me nothing. I know the shape in the tree line and the length of the stride and the quality of the attention when it turned and looked at me. I know what a 600-pound grizzly with 3 seasons in that corridor sounded like when it decided to leave, and I know the direction it went, and I know what came into the space it vacated. I know that I sat on a granite ledge for 18 hours and heard nothing that told me I was still being followed. I know that the following June I sat on a log and waited and was allowed to wait. And I know the drainage in northwestern Montana has been keeping its own account of who moves through it, long before I arrived with 8 years of knowledge and a caliber designed for the largest animals in this ecosystem. The account it kept on the morning of September 24th is the account I've given you. I haven't gone back in September. I'm not sure I will. There's a question I can't resolve, whether going back is an act of understanding or an act of testing something that has already been decided, whether it matters to whatever accounting is kept in that corridor, whether I return or not. What I can say is this: something that was there before I arrived and will be there after I'm gone moved through that drainage on one morning in September and made a decision about me that I am still trying to be worthy of. The rest of it lives in the corridor, in the prints that were in the mud at the game trail on a June morning when the dew was still on the grass, and a man who had survived something sat on a log and waited and was allowed to sit there as long as he needed. As long as he needed. I needed a long time. I'm still needing it. Caleb erupts into the frame of a trail camera. Not walks, not jogs. Erupts, mid-sprint, already at maximum speed, already breathing in the shallow, cracking pattern of a man whose body has been running on pure adrenaline for longer than this camera has been watching. This is not the beginning of the chase. The chase began somewhere back in the dark before the camera had eyes on it, and Caleb and Bigfoot are already deep into it when the sensor fires. His rifle is in both hands, but hanging completely wrong, swinging with each stride like something grabbed off the ground on the way out the door, like a man who did not have time to properly grip it because there was no time to properly grip anything. His head snaps back over his left shoulder once, then again, then a third time, lips moving, forming a word the audio hasn't resolved yet. Then the audio resolves it. He was screaming, "Bigfoot!" He doesn't say it like a question. He doesn't deliver it the way you'd say it to a friend as a joke, a story told around a fire. He shouts it the way you shout the name of a wave you can see cresting behind you on the beach and have already accepted you cannot outrun. Pure identification. Pure confirmation of something he has apparently been uncertain about until this exact moment. And the certainty, the knowing, makes his face do something that the camera catches in the frame before he clears the edge. He keeps running because understanding what Bigfoot is apparently makes everything worse, not better. The word does not slow him down. It accelerates him. So what did he actually see back there that turned a hunt into a retreat? The camera vibrates on. Its mount a half-second before Caleb enters the frame. A single deep impact registers in the sensor, transmitted through the ground, through root systems, through the tree the mount is bolted to. Something large and moving fast struck the earth nearby. Something that was already at speed when it did. Then Caleb appears, already running, already past the point of composed retreat. Those two events are not a coincidence. The impact is Bigfoot. The sprint is Caleb's response to Bigfoot. The camera catches the aftermath of an encounter that has already been decided, and what it records from here forward is not whether Bigfoot is real. That question is already answered. What the camera records is what happens next. The forest begins documenting the chase before Caleb has cleared the first frame. Rocks start hitting trees and ground within seconds of Caleb's first appearance on camera. Investigators who later catalog the physical evidence along this trail corridor do not describe it as ambiguous or subtle. They describe it as systematic. One rock embeds itself into a cedar trunk so deep that the recovery team later needs tools not to pry it loose, but to cut into the surrounding wood and physically extract it. The impact crater is circular, clean, and penetrates inward at a depth that rules out any naturally falling object. This rock was thrown. It was thrown hard. It was thrown by Bigfoot, and Bigfoot threw it while running. If Caleb came prepared with a rifle, how was Bigfoot already matching him with something this precise? Another of Bigfoot's strikes fractures bark at roughly shoulder height on an adult male, leaving a splintered blast pattern that radiates outward from a single compression point. Not a branch dislodged by something running past. Not debris. Something launched with precision and with force at a specific height, toward a specific moving target, from a moving origin point behind him. The bark doesn't just crack. It explodes outward from that single point the way material explodes when something fast and dense hits it straight on. But here is what the impact record actually means, because it is not random and the pattern is not subtle once you see it. When investigators map the strikes chronologically against Caleb's path, flagging each impact site, assigning it a position along his route, building the sequence in order, what emerges is a picture of Bigfoot not reacting, not panicking, not throwing wildly in all directions the way a startled animal throws. The picture that emerges is of Bigfoot calibrating, of Bigfoot adjusting. The early strikes land low, ground level, near root systems, displacing soil. Then the mid-trail strikes begin to rise. Trunk impacts climb to waist height on the marked trees, then chest height, then shoulder height. Then investigators are standing at embedded impact marks 8 and 9 feet up the trunks of trees that Caleb passed at a full sprint. That progression is not the profile of debris disturbed by a large animal moving through forest at speed. That is the profile of Bigfoot finding its range. Of Bigfoot walking its aim upward toward a running man as Bigfoot closed the distance between them. That is not animal behavior in the sense of startled and reactive. That is targeting behavior. That is the difference between an animal that has been surprised and Bigfoot that has made a decision and is now executing it with patience. The forest shows directionality the entire length of this trail. Damage on the left side of the path. Damage on the right side of the path. Damage directly behind Caleb's line of travel, but nothing ahead of him. Nothing to the sides of trees he hasn't reached yet. Bigfoot's throws are always landing behind him and around him, never anticipating him, always following, which means Bigfoot is tracking, not cutting off. Bigfoot is staying in close pursuit rather than circling ahead, and Bigfoot is throwing rocks at the same time. That is the detail that demands to be held on to, because consider what it means physically. Something is moving fast enough through dense forest terrain to close distance on a sprinting adult male, and Bigfoot is simultaneously selecting rocks, picking them up, and throwing them with enough force to embed them in tree trunks, running and throwing and narrowing the gap, all at the same time. Whatever the gap was when this chase began, Bigfoot is making it smaller. If the gap is shrinking no matter what Caleb does, what was his plan supposed to be? At approximately 6:43 p.m., established through shadow angle analysis correlated against trail cam timestamps, Caleb turns partially and fires. The shell casing evidence tells this story better than the footage could because casings do not lie about the state of the body at the moment of ejection. Investigators recover 11 casings along the retreat corridor. When they map them, direction of ejection, spacing between them, the angle each one traveled when it left the chamber, they are not looking at the pattern of a man who stopped, planted his feet, acquired a target, steadied his breathing, and fired. The arc the casings describe is wide and irregular and consistently tracking backward along the trail. This is a man firing while his legs are still moving, firing while his body is actively destabilizing, squeezing the trigger while the rest of him is committed to forward motion, because stopping is not a viable option with Bigfoot closing behind him. 3 of the rounds strike trees in the area directly ahead of where Caleb was standing when he fired, and all 3 are angled upward. This is the detail that should stop every person looking at this evidence cold, because it reframes everything about the encounter up to this point. Because if he's aiming up, just how big was what he was shooting at? Bigfoot was moving through that brush at full stride without ducking, without crouching, without lowering its profile in response to incoming fire. 11 rounds, and Bigfoot did not lower itself. The bullets were not stopping Bigfoot. They were not redirecting Bigfoot. They were not changing the rate at which Bigfoot was closing distance. And Bigfoot knew this. Bigfoot had absorbed gunfire and was still coming, and the casing pattern tells you Caleb knew that the bullets weren't working. The forest answers immediately after Caleb fires. A rock strikes a tree directly above where Caleb's last ejected casing was found. Bigfoot's response landing within seconds of Caleb's last shot, which tells you something about how much distance existed between them at this point. Bigfoot's impact splits the bark outward in a star pattern, wood fibers blasting out from a central compression point, and the force required to produce that specific pattern. Investigators later consult a structural material specialist on this exact question, is not achievable by a human throw. A second rock from Bigfoot buries itself into the packed soil just off the trail, and when investigators probe the impact hole, they measure more than 3 inches of penetration into ground that has been compacted by years of foot traffic. 3 inches into dirt so dense it holds normal boot prints at less than 1. The rock did not bounce. It did not skip. It drove straight down into the earth and stayed there, like it had been hammered in by something with no interest in how hard the ground was. If that kind of force lands just inches off his path, how long before one lands on him? From this point forward, the gap between Caleb and Bigfoot collapses. The second trail camera in the network catches fragments of this phase. The footage is genuinely difficult to watch. Caleb stumbles into the lower left of the frame. His right knee hits the ground hard, full impact, full weight, and his left arm swings wide for balance, and for a complete half-second, it looks like the run ends right there on that patch of trail. But he shoves himself back upright and keeps going, and what the camera catches in those half-second frames where his knee is down is the expression on his face looking back in the direction Bigfoot is coming from. He shoves himself back up. The rifle stock is visibly cracked at this point, a fracture running along the wood that was not present in the earlier footage. Bigfoot's thrown rocks have been landing close. His breathing, which the audio segment picks up clearly in this stretch, is no longer the hard rhythmic labor of a man pacing himself through exertion. It is sharp and breaking, the kind of breathing that happens when a body has burned through its reserves and is running on the last of something that is not replenishable. And if his body is already at its limit, how was he ever supposed to finish what he started? And then, between the trees behind him, 40 feet back, moving through a gap between 2 large trunks, Bigfoot crosses the frame. But before we get into that, you need to see this, because we found more evidence of Bigfoot similar to this. We got files, pictures, and even footage that never made it online. Things that were taken down, ignored, or completely removed. We gathered everything into one file. If you want to see it, it's in the description. Now back to the story. The shape that moves through that gap is upright and bipedal. Bigfoot's shoulders clear the lower branches of the surrounding trees, and those branches hang 8 feet off the ground. The shoulder width of Bigfoot, measured against trunk diameters established from later site photography to provide scale, falls between 28 and 32 inches across. The arms hang long, not human proportion long, longer than that, substantially longer, and vegetation at mid-trunk height brushes against the backs of Bigfoot's hands as Bigfoot passes without any downward reach at all. If Caleb set out to hunt this, how did he plan to handle something built this far outside human scale? The trees themselves respond to Bigfoot's passage not by breaking, but by bending slightly under incidental contact as the bulk moves through. The form is wide enough that it makes contact with them simply by moving forward in a straight line. Bigfoot does not adjust its path for the trees. The trees adjust for Bigfoot. Bigfoot is visible in the gap for somewhere between 2 and 2.5 seconds, depending on how the frame count is read. Just long enough for the shape to register as something solid, something upright, something that does not belong between those trees and never has. There is mass there. There is height. There is a forward tilt to Bigfoot's shoulders that communicates motion even before Bigfoot actually moves across the gap. And then Bigfoot does, fast and controlled, slipping back behind the cover of a thick trunk and low-hanging limbs, and the frame collapses back into nothing but layered greens and browns. Forest. Empty space where something very large very clearly was half a second ago. The rock from Bigfoot lands less than a second after Bigfoot disappears behind the trunk. It drops hard into the dirt near Caleb's feet with enough force to punch into the loose soil, sending a burst of dry earth upward in a sharp spray that kicks to about knee height before falling back. The sound the audio captures is loud and sudden, more like something deliberately thrown than something that fell from height. There is no visible arc in the footage, no traceable origin point, just Bigfoot's impact, abrupt, close, landed with intent. Caleb's body jolts sideways from Bigfoot's near miss. The sharp flinch throws the camera off balance, the frame tilts, catches a blur of ground, then snaps back as he regains his footing. He does not stop. He tries to push faster. If he's speeding up instead of turning to fight, what does that say about what he believes his chances are? But something changes in how Caleb moves from this point forward. Up until Bigfoot's rock lands near his feet, his stride is long and consistent. Panicked, but still controlled. Still the stride of a man who believes he might be able to outrun what is behind him. After Bigfoot's near miss, there is a noticeable change. His steps shorten, his shoulders rise and tighten. The camera shake becomes more erratic in a way that suggests his footing is becoming less certain or his legs are beginning to fail him. He keeps running, but the rhythm of a man who believes he can survive this is gone from his movement, and the gap between Caleb and Bigfoot is no longer what it was. By the time Caleb steadies the camera again, breathing louder, steps uneven and shortening, the space behind him no longer feels like 40 feet. The ravine is where the distance finally collapses to nothing. Caleb's rifle is found in this zone. This rifle was gripped by Bigfoot and forced apart, one of Caleb's boots. Is found nearby, heel first in the mud, driven deep enough into the earth that pulling it free requires deliberate effort. He did not step out of it. The geometry of the impression, full heel, full weight, deep, is the geometry of a boot that was still planted in the ground when the person wearing it was removed from it. Caleb was pulled upward out of the boot while Bigfoot held it planted. The heel stayed, but Caleb did not. If Bigfoot can strip him out of his own footing like this, what control does Caleb have left over anything? The final trail camera sits just past the ravine edge. The footage from this last segment is unstable from the first frame. Slight, persistent vibration, a subtle blur like the ground under the mount, is no longer entirely stable. Something nearby has changed the ground's relationship with the equipment. Caleb is on the ground when he enters the frame, not running, not walking, crawling backward, one hand reaching behind him for purchase in the soft earth at the ravine's edge, his body low and moving slowly, his eyes fixed on the direction he came from. His face is visible for the first 3 seconds of this segment, and what is on his face is not the expression of someone who still believes there is a version of this that ends differently. There is a clarity there, the kind of clarity that arrives when Bigfoot has taken everything away except the present moment. The tree line moves. The whole edge of the forest shifts. A dark seam opens between 2 ancient pines, and for a half second, the camera catches nothing but the void between the trunks. Then Bigfoot steps fully into the frame, not partially, not as an edge or a shoulder or a shape suggested between trees. Bigfoot is in the open, fully exposed, fully present, and the scale of Bigfoot against the surveyed dimensions of this specific camera location, the cataloged brush heights, the measured tree diameters, establishes something between 8.5 and 9 feet tall standing at the edge of the forest looking at Caleb on the ground. Bigfoot's shoulders sit above the lowest branches of the surrounding understory without effort. Bigfoot's head clears the ferns and salal the way a person walks through knee-high grass. The arms swing at Bigfoot's sides, and Bigfoot's hands clear vegetation that comes to mid-chest height on the surrounding trees, brushing it aside as Bigfoot moves forward. Each step Bigfoot takes compresses the ground visibly, debris pushing outward from Bigfoot's foot in a small shockwave of disturbed earth and leaves radiating outward with each footfall. The weight in Bigfoot's legs, thick columns of muscle around bone as big as fence posts, is visible in the footage. You can see the way the ground accepts that weight, reluctant and helpless, yielding under each step because it has no alternative. Bigfoot moves forward without hesitation. There is no pause at the tree line. No threat display, no warning, behavior of any kind. No chest beating, no roar, no raised posture or bared teeth or any of the behaviors that would communicate aggression building toward action. Just forward motion from Bigfoot, continuous and unhurried, like something that made its decision long before this moment and is now doing nothing more complicated than following through. The gait is long and economical. Each stride from Bigfoot covers 10 feet of ground with the easy rhythm of something designed for forward progress above all else. Bigfoot's head stays level. Bigfoot's eyes, visible even in the grainy footage, visible across the distance, stay fixed on Caleb. He is the only thing in the frame that Bigfoot is looking at. Caleb raises one arm, not the arm that would hold the rifle. Bigfoot destroyed the rifle, and everyone who has watched this footage understands that the rifle would not have changed what is happening now. He raises his left arm, the one nearest the camera. His hand opens. His fingers spread. It is not a fighting gesture. It is not surrender in any formal sense. It is something that exists between those two things. A reflex, maybe, or something that comes from a place in a person that acts when all the other parts have run out of actions to take. A rock from Bigfoot hits the camera mount first. The view swings hard upward, tilting the frame toward canopy and open sky. And for the final 2 seconds of stable footage, the angle looks up and back toward where Bigfoot was standing. In that final tilted frame, Bigfoot is leaning down into Caleb's space, over him, filling the frame above him. Bigfoot's torso blocks out the available light. The far arm of Bigfoot is planted on the ground for balance, and that hand alone is larger than Caleb's head. Bigfoot's near arm, the reaching arm, is descending with the palm open. Not clawing, not swatting. Descending the way something descends when the mechanism holding it up lets go. There is no expression on Bigfoot's face that the camera can resolve. There is shadow and mass and the terrible patience of something that has been through this before. Investigators locate a secondary holster impression in the mud at the ravine edge. Left hip, consistent with a compact sidearm. Caleb carried a reserve pistol on his left side, confirmed by his department equipment log. The holster is empty in the mud impression. He drew his reserve weapon at the ravine's edge while on his back, while Bigfoot stood directly over him. That tells you something about Caleb Horn that everything else in this evidence record cannot. The camera captures what follows in fragments. The mount had taken Bigfoot's rock strike by this point, the angle compromised, tilted back toward canopy. But fragments are enough because the physical record fills every gap the camera cannot. Bigfoot lifts him. Caleb's remaining boot print, the left one, the one that did not get pulled off in the mud earlier, is found at the ravine edge. Heel first, full weight impression, 6 inches deep. Then there is nothing. No further boot impressions ahead of it. No drag marks, no signs of a man crawling or scrambling or rolling backward over the rim. Just the single boot print, and then absence. Bigfoot picked Caleb up off the ground before his feet had another chance to touch the earth. Bigfoot stood at the edge of that ravine and extended its arms out over open air. And what was in those arms was Caleb. The tilted camera catches 3 seconds of it. The angle is wrong. The blur is real. Caleb is airborne in the frame, his legs visible in the lower portion of the tilted image, dangling against the open space of the ravine. And the stillness in his legs is the detail that stays, the stillness where there should be thrashing, while his left arm makes small, tight movements at his left hip. Deliberate movements, precise movements, the movements of a man doing something specific with the last thing he has available, happening inside what every piece of evidence confirms is an unsurvivable situation, while Bigfoot holds him over the edge. Then the audio catches it. 2 shots, a pause of roughly 2/3 of a second, not hesitation, repositioning, and then a third. The first 2 shells are recovered from the ravine floor 30 feet below. Their trajectories, extrapolated from impact angles and final resting positions, are consistent with rounds fired upward at steep angle from a position below the shooter's own eye level, braced against whatever surface was available, braced against Bigfoot. The 3rd shell is never recovered. What the camera catches in the half-second after the 3rd shot is a change in the silhouette above Caleb. Bigfoot's shape changes. The arm holding Caleb does not retract cleanly. It drops, sudden and lateral, the way a support fails, rather than the way a decision is executed. Caleb goes over the ravine edge, not thrown but falling. Released, the grip on him gone, and the sound the audio preserves in the 2 frames where his body is airborne is not a scream. It is wind, just the sound of a body moving fast through open air. The ravine camera, still running on its broken mount, still angled wrong toward the canopy, catches what happens at the edge after Caleb falls. Bigfoot comes down, not controlled, not settling. The shape in the tilted frame drops hard to the ground at the rim, and the camera itself vibrates with the impact. Bigfoot's legs fold, then straighten, then fold again in a way that is neither a crouch nor a collapse, but somehow both. Bigfoot's body pitches forward once, rights itself, and then does not right itself again. Bigfoot settles. Bigfoot goes still. A pool of blood forms in the mud at the rim. The subsequent site photography documents it in detail. A dark, saturated stain roughly 3 feet across, pressed into the earth around the depression left by Bigfoot's final drop. The forensic report confirms the staining is biological in origin. It is not Caleb's blood. It is not from any documented North American species. Bigfoot bled out at the edge of that ravine in volume. Caleb's 3 shots, fired from below, braced against whatever surface he could find, fired while Bigfoot held him over the edge. Those 3 shots reached something in Bigfoot that 11 rounds at a distance had not. They come for Bigfoot at 9:11 p.m. The camera, still running, still tilted toward canopy, picks up 3 large upright forms moving in from the tree line. They do not call out. They do not pause at the edge. They gather around Bigfoot on the ground with the quiet, focused movement of something that has done this before, that has come for its own in the dark, that has carried its dead back through the forest before anyone with a camera was present to document it. The stain stays. The blood stays. But Bigfoot is gone. Caleb's body is recovered 4 miles downriver 2 days later. The injuries documented in the recovery report are consistent with a significant fall, followed by immersion and transport downstream. He was found in the shallows at a river bend, face up, in 6 inches of water. His left hand was still closed.